Hello and welcome to Crossing Borders with Nathan Lustig, where I interview entrepreneurs doing startups across borders and the people who support them, with a focus on companies that have some relationship to Latin America. My guest today is Patricio Williams, founder of DTA and Pago Rural, an Argentina-based startup that creates structured debt vehicles to help farmers finance the investments they need to make to run their farms. We'll talk about why he left a stable finance job at the height of the financial crisis a year before getting married to start Pago Rural with only $10,000 in savings, how he got started and grew his business to financing $20 million in debt in his first 4 years, and then getting investment from Silicon Valley and Europe while growing his business to over $120 million in loans to over 15,000 farmers in Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay today. We also get into some of the challenges of starting up in Argentina, why he thinks Argentinian entrepreneurs have done well compared to other Latin American entrepreneurs, and the steps governments in Argentina and the Argentine Entrepreneur Association are taking to make Argentina more entrepreneur-friendly today. I really enjoyed my conversation with Patricio, and I hope you do too. Welcome to the podcast, Pato. Thanks for taking the time to do it.
Hi, Nathan. How are you doing?
Doing well. So where in the world are you today?
I'm sitting in the central business district in Buenos Aires, working with all my team and really looking forward for this podcast.
Awesome. Are you from Buenos Aires originally?
I'm born and raised in Buenos Aires, yes. I now live with my wife and 2 kids in a small city called Montevideo, in a very nice place called Uruguay, another country beside Argentina. And I travel back and forth from Montevideo, Sao Paulo, and Asunción, and Buenos Aires. Our team is based here in Buenos Aires mainly.
So can you give me just a quick overview of your business? What do you guys do?
What we do with DTA, our firm, we do structured finance for agribusiness, non-banking loans for farmers. We're now launching something called Pago Rural. Pago Rural is going to be like the first non-banking platform for farmers in Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay, and really looking forward to expand it to Brazil and why not to the US. What we want to do is like disrupt the credit atmosphere regarding and all around agribusiness. We do something we call agricultural value chain finance. What we do is we work alongside vendors like fertilizer companies, seed companies, and other input companies, and let the farmers with a very easy process in 2 or 3 steps finance their input purchases for up to a year. I think we're doing quite well. We've now launched a line of credit of $100 million in Argentina. Okay, and looking forward to do it and expand it to other places in the world.
And so what does that look like for a farmer? Are your clients generally small farms? Are they agribusiness, larger companies? Who do you generally work with?
We call ourselves impact lenders because I think we really have impact. We really finance from the non-banked to the very big and corporate farmers. We really do not discriminate. We have big guys among our clients and small guys. There are nice anecdotes there with people maybe telling us, Patricio, Pato, we do not have a bank account. Can we get financed by Pago Rural? Yes, you can. And then they pay to the cooperatives they work with. So we do not discriminate. We have really a really spread type of client and are looking forward to finance everyone. No, the big ones, the small ones, the medium one. Obviously, we're not the cheapest lending in the market because we cannot afford to. But really, we want to be like an option for agile and secure lending.
And so can you walk me through what it looks like for a typical client? Why would they need your service?
Typical clients around our region and also in the US are not funded by banks. And this is not speaking bad about banks. Banks have their business, but their business is really regulated. So typically, for example, in Latin America, let's say in the ecosystem of 5 major crops, cattle and dairy, in Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay, the main producers here in Latin America, a farmer will get funded 20 to 30% by banks and 70 to 80% by input suppliers. So there's a huge outflow of credits not supplied by formal institutions that is funded, for example, by the Monsantos, the Syngentas, the Bayers, the Bunge's of this life, who really need to finance themselves because nobody will do it for them. And there's a lot of farmers that could get better funding with more agile tools, for example, that we address with Pago Rural, we're kind of filling that gap, between the needs of farmers and the needs of big firms that have huge credit lines there in the streets and want to make them better.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So how did a guy who grew up in the city in Buenos Aires end up working in a business and creating a business that is financing farmers?
I'm kind of a rare species. When I was 5 years old, I told my parents I was going to study agronomy. I didn't own a farm, but it's like I have it in my blood. I studied agronomy and really started thinking about what's going to work in. Really understood I didn't want to be at the farm, but really loved agribusiness. I started my career at 22 years old as a soybean trader. I worked as a trader for 5 years and then saw this opportunity to fill in the gap between supply and demand of financial products for the agribusiness. And then started in 2009, slowly but steady. I worked by myself for 4 years, then went and get funded by two investors in Silicon Valley. Then we get funded in 2014 by an accelerator in Buenos Aires. And we've recently closed with a private equity fund, a convertible note last May. So it's a pretty strange story. I'm from Buenos Aires, wanted to study agronomy since I was 5, and then get involved in financial services and agribusiness kind of by casualty,
And what do you think drew you towards wanting to be involved in farming even from such a young age?
I don't know. It's a mystery, but I think it's something you feel. I don't know. Really, I couldn't tell.
Yeah, sometimes they say businesses choose us rather than we choose the business. So it's kind of interesting.
No, regarding financial services, what I saw, I was more of the kind of an entrepreneur guy than a corporate guy. And I saw the opportunity of starting my own firm without a lot of money. When you imagine yourself being an entrepreneur in agribusiness, you always think of having a lot of money to buy farmland, to buy cattle, or to go and grow crops, But what I saw was the opportunity to start up without any money. Really, I left my old job as a trader with maybe $10,000 in my bank account and started. My real investment was the opportunity cost of my wage.
What was your friends' or family's reaction when you leave a really good job as a trader at a young age to go start a business? Were they supportive, or were they saying, you're crazy leaving this great job that you have?
Wow. No, they all told me I was crazy. It was back in early 2009. It was April 2009. We were coming from the subprime crisis. The world was like in total chaos. Everyone told me you should get your seat in your firm and never leave. But I thought that crisis was a nice opportunity. I was young, and I felt that if I didn't took a step forward at that time, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it in the future.
That's a similar story to a lot of other entrepreneurs that I've talked with that are based in Latin America. Why do you think you were able to overcome the temptation of staying in a business? Because I also speak with lots and lots of people who are still in business, working in a large company that have been there for now 15, 20 years, that have been saying for the last 5, 10, 7 years, hey, I really want to go and start my business, but they never do. What do you think allowed you to go do that?
You have to feel it. You have to feel the need. Nowadays, I'm a father. I always think about it. I don't know if nowadays I would take that step. I think I would, because I really feel it in my veins, the entrepreneurial side. But one of the drivers, I used to speak this with my actual wife. She was my girlfriend in that time. And I told her one of the drivers for being an entrepreneur was creating jobs, that I felt I could be useful to society, not as a politician, not as a physician, not as a doctor, but creating a firm and maybe giving 5, 10 jobs, something really, really humble. But I thought that was one of the main drivers that led me to make my startup. Mm-hmm. And when you start, it's like the adrenaline. I really love it. But I think one of the drivers was creating jobs.
And so let's rewind to when you first leave your trading job and you're just about to start. Did you have a business plan fully ready to go? Or did you say, you know what, I want to do something in agribusiness. Let's get going.
No, I didn't have a business plan. I didn't have a cash flow. I was like, the only thing I had was a business model that I knew would work. I have a very strong idea of what to do and how to do it. And one of my characteristics is I'm very stubborn, you know. I really took the risk. It was, like we say in Argentina, ahora nunca, no? It's now or never. Mm-hmm. That was my feeling inside, no? If I'll do it now or never, because I was doing very, very good at work. When I told them I was leaving, they made me an offer to double my wage, what was really tempting. But really, I wasn't leaving because of money. It wasn't, my drivers didn't have to do anything with money or my economics, or it was more like something I felt, and I have the need to prove myself I could do. And I was 27 years old, and I thought, if I don't do it now, I think I'm gonna be in my comfort zone. It's very difficult to leave it if I stay here 3 to 5 years more. Nowadays, I don't know, 8 years of experience. If I should advise someone, maybe this is said a lot, but it's never too late. I think there's no recipes for entrepreneurial life. I think there's no a perfect moment, but the moment you can tackle. No, in Latin America, many entrepreneurs do it when they feel the need, or maybe when they are in crisis. Maybe they got fired from a job, and then they go and start a firm that maybe is really successful. You know, sometimes in Latin America, a big difference between the US, for example, or more mature markets where you have a strong venture capital ecosystem, where you have strong accelerators and institutional matters are really stable. Many people take the leap before. In Latin America, we're used to have a safe job, to have our bills paid, to have our mortgage paid, and it's very difficult to take the risk. You find a lot of entrepreneurs that take the leap when they are fired, maybe, or when, for example, you had a big economic crisis in Argentina, and you think, well, this is my opportunity to do it, you know?
So let's look at that moment. You've left your job. You've got the business model in hand. What were your first steps to start building the business?
First steps, speaking with a good lawyer, because I was going to start a structured finance business by myself, doing public offerings. So one of the first things was having not a big team. As I told you, I was by myself for 4 years, but really focused on having very good providers, very good service providers, very good accountants, very good lawyers, very good advisors. And then I went down from my nice car that the former company I used to work for gave me. I got to my wife's little car. It was a Volkswagen Golf in Argentina, a very humble car, and started going to see my clients in Córdoba, in La Pampa, in Entre Ríos, in Santa Fe. And I know something that helped me that's really nice. I was getting married in 8 months, and I'm stubborn, but I'm also really like, how do you say, Nathan, orgulloso in English?
Proud.
I'm really proud, okay? So I wanted to pay for my party by myself. I didn't want my father-in-law, my father, to give me any money. So I went to Punta del Este in Uruguay. I paid for the place. I paid $5,000 for the place and committed myself to get all the money before February. Well, my first money came in 6th January and 26th January of the next year.
Talk about a gun to your head.
15 days before I was getting married, you know?
That's real motivation.
That's really motivation. I think thinking backwards, if I didn't have that goal, maybe I would have gone back to trading. Because it's not easy to start in Argentina, you know? Nowadays, I think it's something to mention, and it's very important. The actual government and the actual institutions are working really hard to encourage entrepreneurial life, as for example, the Chilean government did with Startup Chile and all those, and Corfo and all those initiatives. The actual administration is working really, really hard. I'm founder of ASEA, it's the Argentinian Entrepreneurs Association. You know, ASEC in Chile. So we are the chapter in Argentina. And for example, a couple of months ago, we got the entrepreneurs law approved in the cameras. For example, something that changed between 2009 and nowadays is that when I started, I built my firm and it took me 7 months to have the firm incorporated. Nowadays, you will be able to incorporate your firm in 1 year. And that's something that encourages a lot of entrepreneurs to jump, no?
That's pretty incredible.
Incredible. So they're encouraging a lot of people that maybe have a lot of doubts, and maybe those doubts are given because of institutional matters, because of instability, or all the bureaucracy you have. They're really encouraging young entrepreneurs or people that are 50, 60 years old to take the leap and come in and join the entrepreneurial world.
So tell me a little bit more about ASEA and how that came about.
ASEA, well, I was invited by Facundo Garretón. Facundo is now a deputy. He's in the Cámara de Diputados in Argentina. Facundo is an entrepreneur. And I think the stories he met one of the founders of ASEC in Chile. He was like astonished of all the booming in Chile regarding entrepreneurs. And he was really well impressed about ASEC nurturing all kinds of entrepreneurs, because for example, you have a lot of firms like Endeavor or like YPO, EO, very good ones, but they are really focused on small niches or impact entrepreneurs or else or that. But nobody was like nurturing everyone. For example, someone that runs a kiosk is an entrepreneur. He's a small one. Maybe he works by himself, but he's an entrepreneur. The spirit in ASEA, I was invited by a couple of entrepreneurs. We were about 10 to 20 people at the beginning, was nurturing everyone, was really being a guide for example, the entrepreneur's law that came by the camera 2 months ago. And I think nowadays ASEA has, I think it's 6,800 entrepreneurs associated, and we're really looking forward to have 100,000 in the next 2 years. So it's a great experience. I think we have lots of models or role models, good role models to copy very near, not watching to the Europe or not watching to the US, but Chile. Chile has done a great job. You've lived there. Startup Chile is great. Corfo is great. And I think as a country, Chile has built all the cimientos. How do you say the cimientos? I'm sorry, Nathan.
The seeds.
The foundings. The foundings.
Yeah, you're right.
The foundings for a really great ecosystem to grow. Okay, Argentina came a little bit later, but I think they are really working on that. And ASEA has a great role there, no?
Yeah, for those that don't know, ASEC in Chile is the Association of Entrepreneurs that basically lobbies for change on behalf of entrepreneurs. So it's different from like a commercial organization or like a manufacturing group, because it's only focused on entrepreneurs. So it's like medium and small businesses. And they've done a really, really good job of making changes to laws. So like in Chile, I think it was not as bad as 7 months to get started, but it was something like a month to get started for opening up a business. And now you can do it in 1 day and online. Things like working with the notaries to be able to start to try to do some other amount of signatures online versus at the notary. So you can actually do e-signatures for some documents, simplifying things with taxes. And so coming from the US, it's very interesting to see that Chile has become this platform with laws and with pressure groups that are actually looking out for the small and medium-sized businesses and entrepreneurs, whereas in the US, most of the organizations that are sort of pressuring and lobbying are for the big ones.
Following that role model of ASEA was built here in Argentina 2 years ago, and I think it's done a great job. Facundo and its president, they did a great job, and they're coming out with concrete things that are going to help entrepreneurs to have a better life.
So what other things are on the menu or on the wish list for ASEA for the next year or two in Argentina?
I think I'm not on the strategic team in ASEA, but I think that connecting the investors, Argentina is working a lot on the investor side, on creating an investor ecosystem. The Argentinian state is working on some private public funds to fund Series A companies. For example, in Argentina, you have a lot of angel investment and accelerators. but you have a great shortfall of venture capital, for example, in Series A companies. So there are many companies that do very well. They get traction in the first 12 to 24 months, but they find no funding when they need real money to scale up. And I think we have good models like Mercado Libre here in Argentina. But back in the years when they started, when Mercado Libre started and other companies started, successful companies like Globant and others, you had another market in Argentina and in Latin America. You have all this bubble that blew up in NASDAQ, and you have a lot of uncertainty and a lot of things that weren't like known in the technology atmosphere. Nowadays, you really don't see, I haven't seen, I'm speaking for myself, not a single investment from a venture capital coming from Silicon Valley to Buenos Aires. And that has to do with institutional matters, with a lot of things. But I think that one of the things that should be a cornerstone of ASEA's work in the next 2 years should be helping investors be confident on Argentina, venture capital really coming to Argentina and not saying they are coming. There are a lot of them that they say they are working in Argentina, but when you go to see their investments, they don't have any investment. I think the only country or the country that has the major upside there is Brazil, given the market. Brazil is really big. Maybe institutionally, it's not as the States, but it's really big. But Argentina has a huge depth with entrepreneurs in what regards to making them more comfortable with their regulations, more comfortable with Argentinians investing in our country. So I think one of the biggest challenges is institutional.
So you mentioned Mercado Libre and Globant, and I've asked other Argentine entrepreneurs that I've had on the podcast, why do you think that Argentina has been so successful at having really good companies like Globant and Mercado Libre, along with a whole generation of other entrepreneurs compared to other Latin American countries that maybe haven't had as much success when you look at all of the economic and institutional issues that you've talked about? Why have Argentines been so successful starting businesses?
I think in part it's a sad story, because one of the big assets Argentina entrepreneurs have is, like we say in Spanish, lo atamos con alambre, no? We're used to all these challenges. We're used to having everything against us, and you have to thrive in an ecosystem where everything is difficult. No, once I was speaking with one of my investors, and he told me, Patricio, estás trotando con el barro hasta las rodillas. No, you're running with like mud until your knees. No?
Yep.
Up to your knees. I am doing quite well. When you get up, when you get through Argentina, when you go out, and then you get to ecosystems or to places where you can work with more clear rules. I don't say, for example, Mercado Libre had an easy time going to Brazil, because it's really challenging going to another economy. But I think in Argentina, all this instability, all those things, these rules changing from 1 month to another, from 1 year to another, give you or train you in a special way. I think maybe that's why I'm saying it's sad, because as well as you have Mercado Libre, Globant, or all these successful entrepreneurs, you have a lot of people damaged in the way, no? And you have a lot of value destroyed in Argentina in the last 100 years. But I think regarding human resources, we really have capable people. We really have resilient entrepreneurs. We have good people here. But I think we shouldn't sleep on our laurels, because other countries are really investing in education. Other countries in the region are investing in having investors come to our country. For example, as I told you, you can't see a single investment in venture capital in Argentina, and you can see a lot in Brazil. So I would ask you another question. Why? If Argentina has the more unicorns in Latin America, no investment is coming to Argentina. I think you have the raw material, you have good entrepreneurs, but all those entrepreneurs started when Argentina, like it or not, was more friendly to investors. Late 90s, okay? None of them started in 2002.
So from our perspective at Magma, we agree with you. Like, if you can slog through the mud and make something successful in Argentina, imagine how good you're going to be when you get out of Argentina. So it's not probably exactly the business development case of building a really, really strong Argentina and doing business locally. But what we try to do is find the best Argentine founders and help them either launch from Argentina to the world, where maybe they're incorporated in the US and are doing business in the US market, or if they're going to Latin America, help them incorporate in Chile, and maybe they still have offices in Argentina, but incorporate abroad and sell abroad. Because if you can sell in Argentina and be successful, imagine how well you're going to sell when you're outside.
Totally agree. Totally agree. Somehow frustrating when you're struggling here, but I totally agree. And I think that if someone is good here, if you give them a better pitch, for example, it's like playing in a football pitch in Argentina or in the Camp Nou. You know, Carlitos Tevez used to play in Forte Apache, barefooted. Imagine how he can play in Juventus or in the Camp Nou in Barcelona. No,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the same kind of thing with entrepreneurs, but I think we have to be very humble and really, really self-critical with ourselves as an ecosystem, because what I really think is, imagine what we could do as a country, imagine what we could do as entrepreneurs if we could have better institutions, better rules, be more friendly with investors. Imagine all the Marcos Valperins or all the Globan that could have thrived from Argentina. So I think that might be one of the challenges of ASEA, of this administration, and always as Argentinians, no? Because I think it's not a responsibility for an institution or for a president. It's an institution for we citizens, we Argentinians, to try to make it better and be conscious of what we can do, but also the huge amount of value we have destroyed.
Well, at least from my perspective, it looks like Argentina's been on the right track the last bit here since the last elections. So hopefully,
Totally
it keeps up.
Of course. No, I totally agree. I'm a really positive, but I think we have to be very humble. And I know that we have a huge amount of guys with unicorns in Latin America. Okay, guys, how can we do it to get more, to do it better? How can they support the ecosystem? How can they help us? How can we hear from them? How can we learn from Mercado Libre? And really be very, very, very humble. We can do it. I totally agree with you. And I think that there are guts and our talent is there.
Yeah, I think so too. So let's go back to your story going out of your trading company. It takes you 7 months to get the business set up. What were your first steps during that 7 months toward getting your first client?
When I left the trading company I worked for, luckily, as I told you, I was offered a raise. They offered me to double my wage. I didn't want that. I wanted to start my job, my own firm. Also, they offered me, they wanted to be my first client. So luckily, I've started with my first client from day one. Didn't want it. Didn't know it was going to be like that. But when I spoke with them, and I told them I'm going to leave, they asked me to stay for 3 more months, but they gave me the first business.
And so were they the first on the lender side that they were willing to put money into?
No, they were the first clients with whose value chain I worked. Okay. They have the clients. I had to go out to the market and get the money.
And so you launched with your first client. How did you go get money?
Well, that was a nice story. That's why I told you that at first, one of the first thing I did was having really good advisors. And what I've learned from my experience is if you do the right job, you can get the money. It's not easy. But what I really started was with public offerings, was issuing public debt on the stock market in Argentina, which is really difficult, but it gives you the opportunity that I had being by myself at home. If you have the right product with the right providers and the right vehicle, you have the money there. So I got the money from institutional investors, even though I was a really small startup. And luckily I had my first client with my former employee.
That's an incredible story of leaving, having your first client, and then getting your money from the public market, from institutions to begin with?
It was really stressful. I didn't want to get my money 10 to 15 days before getting married. Imagine my wife. She was really young. Nowadays, she would kill me. But I think the challenge was good. The timing was good. And maybe that helped me to have a high standard of working. I think sometimes people think that when you do a startup, you only bootstrap. Bootstrapping has a lot of phases. And I think you have to be lean. But sometimes depending on which market you are addressing, and that's one of the difficult things. One of the nice things of my startup was that I could start nearly with no money, okay? Having the opportunity cost of my wage. But one of the difficult things was it was a very formal market. Institutional investors are not easy to tackle and not easy to address. But I think it was my chance. I saw the chance there. I didn't have any money. In Argentina, I was an agronomist working in trading, so I didn't know all these words of raising money or venture capital. Really, I didn't know what a venture capital was back in 2009, okay? I was really basic. It was more like a gallego there. So I saw an opportunity I could tackle and then started making those silly questions from which you learn a lot and started my roadmap.
That's a pretty amazing story. What do you think set you apart from the other people that maybe they start doing their business, but they're not able to actually get some funding behind it, or they're not able to get their first couple of clients? Do you think it was knowing that you had that wedding coming up, or was it something else?
I think that having your tummy empty, hunger, I needed the money. I couldn't afford losing money. I couldn't afford being a bit negative. One of the things I really admire from technology startups, it's that they, for example, they started a business and they know they're going to be a bit negative for 7 years, for 10 years. I really admire it because I couldn't dare, In my mindset, I needed the money. I needed to get the bills paid. Okay. Very basic. And then started looking for investors, not before 4 years from launching Pago DTA in 2009. My first investment came in 2013. And one of the investors was Wences Casares. Wences is a very successful, one of these Argentinian successful entrepreneurs, and now he's running a Sapo, a Bitcoin bank in Silicon Valley. And Wences was willing to invest 1 year before than I accepted the investment. So nowadays, I would advise my older Patricio, get the money next week. But I was very doubtful about getting investors. How is it going to be to have a partner? I don't know. But I think I have the right partners. They've supported me a long way since they entered the company. And from that point of view, I think in Argentina, nowadays, you have a much more developed ecosystem with accelerators, with venture capitals willing to start business in Argentina. But back in 2009, you had no one, and I was an agronomist. Again, I was a trader with financial services and financial structuring knowledge, but no knowledge about venture capital, technology, Silicon Valley. It was like Chinese for me.
Because you worked for just basically by yourself for 4 years. How many clients did you have during that 4 year period?
Around 50.
And how were you able to manage all of that, doing that yourself?
I think that something really strange about agribusiness, it's very cyclical. So you have high peak months of job. You are accommodated against the harvest season, You have high peaks, for example, in the second semester and very low peaks of work in the first semester. So I could manage it. I was used to work a lot beforehand. I didn't have a problem making a lot of hours. And really, the thing of being alone was not that I wasn't confident about the business, but more on the side I was really conservative. I was willing to go step by step before hiring someone. I didn't want to let anybody down. If I was to hire you, Nathan, I wanted to be able to pay for your job and to pay your wages on time and to have you with all the regulations okay. From that point of view, I was really on the conservative side.
And so you have your 50 clients. How much money more or less were you structuring at that point?
I think in the first 4 years, I've structured around $20 million.
And were those clients all over Argentina or mostly in a certain area?
No, they were all over Argentina, mainly in the principal, like I would say, in the corn belt of Argentina. It's Santa Fe, Cordoba, and Buenos Aires, in the main productive areas. No, most of them were warehouses or farmers.
And what made you decide to hire your first employee?
Well, in those 4 years, I really wanted to scale up. As I told you before, I didn't know anything about raising money or venture capital or angel investment. But I was really humble and started to learn about it, to read a lot. One of the things I found myself with in those first 4 years is that economically speaking, I was doing really good and earning more money than in my former job. I was earning, I don't know, 300K a year. That was really good for me as a young guy. But I had a lot of spare time. So on a daily basis, I woke up at 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, started working, and didn't stop at, I don't know, till 7 or 8 p.m. Okay. So what I really did was started learning on how could I scale up, how could I get money for my venture, and who would be the right investor. Okay. And there was when I came along in 2011, 2 years before they funded me, with a fund that was created by Wences and some of the former founders of Patagon. And they invested in technology. I didn't have technology in DTA at that time. We do now. But they invested, well, we need to invest in technology, agribusiness, and finance. But they were invested in firms that were already with, I don't know, $2.5 million in EBITDA, anything to do with me. The only thing I had was a lot of will, and I contacted them on 2011, traveled to Palo Alto. They told me they really liked me, but I was really still very young and at an early stage. I kept on filing them on everything we were doing, and Wences called me a year later and told me, Pato, I'm willing to invest by myself. You have to give me evaluation. So we signed up a term sheet 6 months later, and I accepted the investment another 6 months later. So I took like a year long, 12 months to decide whether I was going to have investors or not. I was like really not typical, no?
Do you think that keeping them updated for all of that time was helpful to getting the investment?
I think it was critical. I think that it's very difficult when you need to get funded right now because you're running out of money. But I think it's very wise to get to know your investors beforehand, maybe when you're not raising money, to get them posted on everything you're doing. It's like building a relationship. I don't know if Nathan, if you agree, but many of the investments in Latin America are more based on character than on actual track record, no?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, even in the US too, I think a lot of it is, do you trust the person that you're going to invest in? Do you think that they have the ability to build the business that they say they're going to, or a completely different business if they need to pivot? So I think, yeah, I mean, building that relationship, showing that you're going to stick to it for the long haul and you're not just in it for a quick buck, I think is really important.
One quick anecdote of our last round, the investors that we closed the convertible note with are not the typical investors. They're not venture capital. They do not do private equity, but they run an asset manager in Switzerland. Okay. So they're not the typical investor. And something that really called up my attention is that they wanted me to have a cash out, okay, from their investment. And I didn't want to. So we were fighting because they wanted me to take out $1.5 million and I didn't. So I think sometimes, and this regarding to many young investors that are out there, many videos that tell you what you have to do, how you have to do it. What I would advise them is Latin America is different and you shouldn't stick to any like mantra, it's do what you feel. If you feel like getting your startup for 30 years and not selling it, do it. You will always be as successful as those who sell and go out in Wall Street Journal. It's not all about the flashlights. It's what you want to do, where you want to add value, why, and I think you'll find the right fit and the right investor for you. There are investors that want to make a big exit in 5 or 7 years. They would want you to have an IPO, but you might find investors that want to go with you for a long time. I think there's no good or bad. It's really sticking to what you feel inside.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's really interesting that you bring it up because we have the opportunity as people that are doing business in Latin America and investing in companies and Latin American entrepreneurs to start to define the culture of what does it mean to be a successful entrepreneur in Latin America, or just a successful entrepreneur period, rather than solely following the sort of Silicon Valley. We need to raise a bunch of money, get to our next milestone so we can raise the next round. And as you talked about earlier, burn for 7 or 10 years rather than get profitable. I think that because startup culture is still pretty new in Latin America, we have the opportunity to be more open to other models.
A nice example, it would be comparing Hollywood to Bollywood in India, no? Two very successful ecosystems, but really different. Hollywood sells much more than Bollywood, and Bollywood produces much more films than Hollywood. They're both successful from different point of views. For example, now with DTA, we're really starting in the early stage to try to learn if we can apply to be a B Corp. So another good initiative that ASEA is tackling here in Argentina is enforcing the law for B Corps in Argentina, that we don't have it. And one of the things we think in Pago Rural is, as a challenge in DTA, one of the things when you finance farmers is that you can't afford to pay very high passive rates to go and lend to farmers at a good active rate. One of the things is getting funded with volume and with good rates. So, and therefore, when we go and speak with multilateral banks, the World Bank, and a lot of people that are trying to address farmers in Latin America, what we find is that in their bottom line, they are addressing their business as a typical firm, and you're not in a typical ecosystem. And that's how we started thinking about maybe we can address DTA and be a non-banking financial institution and a B Corp. And that's going out of the box. It's thinking out of the box, and as you said a couple of minutes ago, redefining in Latin America what is success, what we wanna do, and why we wanna do it.
And so for you, what would be your definition of success for you and your business?
I think that having the most impact regarding quantity or number of farmers that we lend to, and also being like an enabler to make Latin America and the US and farming worldwide easier from the fintech point of view.
So when you went from not having any employees and not having investors to having your first investor and starting to scale, can you talk about some of the challenges that you had going from being, 4 years just working on your own to now having to work with some investor partners, but then also employees?
One of the main challenges is when you speak to an SME, one of the daily main challenges is managing people. It's all the flashlights around the entrepreneur ecosystem sometimes are like distracting.
The big flashing lights are distracting people from what they really should be working on. I mean, we've had a similar thing in Chile where the ecosystem was sort of pushed to talk about if you're a startup founder, you're a superhero, or you're a rock star, which we don't like at all, as I don't personally like it. And then in Magma, we try to have the exact opposite sort of mantra of like, no, you're just the normal person starting a business, working hard, doing your stuff, focus on the work rather than getting in the newspaper and being that rock star.
One of the main challenges when hiring people is that they get like enlightened by all those flashes. And on a daily basis, it's much more difficult working in a startup than working in a corporate business, You have a lot of challenges. It's nearly impossible to do a proper job description. Many guys, when I interview them, they tell me, okay, which is my job description? It's like, and I really laugh a lot about it because there's no proper job description. But alongside that, you have to be, and this is particularly in the fintech ecosystem, when you lend in the lending space, you have to be really serious about managing money, really serious about compliance, about AML, about a lot of things that are more associated with corporate business than with a startup. So I think that we're like working between three different ecosystems: the agribusiness ecosystems, the financial ecosystem, and the technology ecosystems, with really different people. It's not the same to speak to an insurance company than to an institutional investors, than speaking to a farmer in Iowa, or to a farmer in Rio Cuarto, or to a farmer in Asunción, Paraguay, than speaking with a software developer for Pago Rural. So one of the main challenges I had was like putting all those hats in different situations and trying to build a solid case for all of them. A solid case for the farmer, a solid case for example, for Monsanto, that's one of our clients, a solid case for institutional investors, at the same time that we build a good fintech model with Pago Rural. So I think that was one of the main challenges. And then I think with investors, I have a very, very good experience with very good, passionate, and supportive investors. And I didn't really have any problems with them. So that was quite easy for me. But I think the main challenge was getting people on board, the right people, getting the frustration with people that you think they are good people, with good characters. They are really capable, but maybe they don't cope with a startup. They don't cope with managing their daily basis with a more proactive way because they're used to being in a big organization where everything is done for them. So I think that was one of the main challenges before we are a really particular startup dealing with very formal people and institutions on one side and very informal people in the farmer side. So that was one of the main challenges in the last 8 years. But I think we're doing quite well.
And how many people are you now?
Now we're a team of 5, and we have around 7 people that are part-time. Data, for example, is we do outsource completely the software development. We do not have one nerd in our team.
And are those Argentine developers or somewhere else?
Yes, it's a firm called Exacta, the Argentine developers.
Very cool. And so it's really amazing that you've been able to build a business this big with only 5 people. It really goes to show you, I mean, WhatsApp, I think only had 13 people when they sold, or 15 people, something like that. And Instagram was something similar. It's amazing what you can do with technology.
I think it's a big challenge, for example, because many times, for example, this is a nice anecdote. We were in a meeting with Dow Chemicals CFO here in Argentina, and she was like really surprised and really liked the business model and the product. So you have to deal with people that maybe are not that comfortable with having someone in the other side that's a startup, So I think that we managed to do that because, for example, as I told you before, we really are keen and develop good providers. We have really good lawyers, really good accountants, really good advisors, and we like work in structuring investment grade papers while we are only a team of 5.
Can you talk a little bit about what returns or what it pays on your investment grade paper? What does it look like for an investor?
Nowadays, we pay between 5% to 8%, depending on the value chain we work with, depending on the country, the moment, but between 5 to 8. And
how many clients do you have today? How many farmers?
This year, our budget is to finance between 100 to 110 to 120 million dollars. It's around $100 million in Argentina and 5 to 10 in Asunción, Paraguay, and in Montevideo, Uruguay. So this year, at December, we would have between 110 and 120 million dollars disbursed, and the impact we plan to have is with more than 15,000 clients.
Wow, 15,000. That's really a lot from your humble beginnings of
Yeah.
having your one or two clients to start with.
Yeah. Yeah. It's nice.
And
You know, one thing that's very difficult to explain about the agribusiness sector is, for example, all my total addressable market in Argentina is around 30,000 farmers. You're not addressing million people markets, you know? I think it's rural America, it's only 1% of the population in the US. So you're addressing really small markets. And that's very difficult when you go and explain people that work with retail, no? eBay's, Amazon's, people in these ecosystems. It's a huge market regarding market cap, the agribusiness market, but it's a small one when you go to see how many farmers you address. The total addressable market in Argentina, maybe 80% of the market is given by, I don't know, 50,000 to 20,000 farmers.
that can be good and bad though, because the amount of money in the market is so big, you only have a smaller amount of clients that you need to sell to.
It's a big challenge, and that's one of the reasons why when we address lenders, we have a lot of due diligence, we have long of discussions with them, because, for example, with Monsanto, the average ticket is 125K. When you go to retail portfolios, maybe the average ticket is $500 in a Visa. It's really a very, very different ecosystems that banks are not used to, institutional investors neither. So I think that one of the challenges is like educating them or learning alongside them how we can address a problem in an efficient way, in a secure way, with a sustainable portfolio.
That's interesting. So basically, you're just finding all the different farmers and putting them all into one diversified vehicle to lower the risk.
Yeah,
that's really smart. It's a really interesting model.
Thank you.
And so what made you decide to expand outside of Argentina to Uruguay and Paraguay?
I think that as an entrepreneur, you always dream about going outside your borders. I think the first small steps is going to markets like Paraguay and Uruguay. Brazil is really big. It's a challenge. We might need to raise a little bit more money. And also we're conducting a research study on the US, where we see we might have a good opportunity, a good business opportunity. And also strategically, we can work in a counter-season market, because here, for example, our work in Argentina is very concentrated in the second semester, and in the US, it would be concentrated in the first semester. So one of the things going to the US is demonstrating ourselves and investors and people in the market, we are prepared and we can work in developed markets as the American market, and also having a counter-season market to balance our cash flow. So we're doing our homework. We're not going to run, but I think we're in the point where we can make it. And if it's not Brazil in 2018, it's going to be the US, where they are deciding. And I think the first step is going to and executing well in Paraguay and Uruguay. As I told you before, I think before recording, I'm very humble about going to different markets. I think it's very easy to put a milestone in a PowerPoint or in a presentation and say, in 5 years' time, I'm going to do this or that. But it's very difficult. It's a much more difficult thing executing. And regarding agribusiness, it's very particular. A farmer in Illinois or Iowa, I can assure you, it's really, really different from a farmer in Mato Grosso, from a farmer in Rio Grande do Sul, or from a farmer in Durazno, Uruguay. They are very, very special people that we can address, that we can understand. But for example, one of the things we're working with is how to develop the local partners in each country to make this soft landing better. No? How can we have the local partner in the US that can better understand farmers in the US? How can we have the local partner in Mato Grosso? Again, we are dealing with money. We are lending. It's very important not only to execute on the volume, but to execute on a good and sustainable portfolio in the long term.
What was it like in terms of being different operating in your first two markets outside of Argentina and Uruguay and Paraguay?
I think the distribution models are completely different. Again, a farmer in Durazno, Uruguay, It's very different from a farm in Entre Rios. They are a couple of kilometers away. They are about 100 kilometers away, but they are different. So one of the big challenges is how to dress a good product, how to dress a good value chain, and how to give farmers a good tool for the daily work while you make a safe investment for a long-term portfolio.
Yeah, that's interesting that you have to figure out the person.
It changes from country to country. I tell you more. It changes from region to region in every country, and it changes from value chain to value chain.
Do you use technology at all to start to streamline that process, or is it still sort of interviewing the people and learning about them and figuring out who they are?
No, nowadays we use technology mainly as a vehicle, as an enabler for the credit origination. But regarding the scoring model, we use typical hard and soft information. And we really work alongside our vendors. We really work alongside the people in the last mile. For example, Monsanto, Dow Chemical, Bunge, the people that are out there, that they are work with the farmer in the last mile. We work really hard with them to understand the value chain as well as we can. And of course, because we are like tech driven and tech biased nowadays, we are starting to work with many startups in the ag tech ecosystem to try and develop better tools for us to score better, for us to raise more money. For example, we're trying to start to work with a startup in Uruguay called Agronóstico. It's a very, very, very good entrepreneur. And we want to develop with them a better scoring model working with artificial intelligence.
No, that's interesting. I'll connect you when we're done. I'll connect you with one of our portfolio companies called Portal Finance, which is doing a similar model, but for factoring and figuring out how to decide if a business makes sense to extend credit to or not. That might be an interesting conversation.
Of course. Thank you.
So you're also the first entrepreneur I've talked to that's doing business in Paraguay. What's that like? I haven't heard much about the ecosystem for doing business and startups there.
You'd be surprised. I think Paraguay is doing a great job. For example, Paraguay is one of the top meat exporters nowadays in the region. I think in the last 5 to 10 years, they've done a great job incentivizing investment in Paraguay. Many Argentinian farmers have gone to Paraguay. Many Uruguayan farmers have gone there, and many Brazilians also. So it's a nice ecosystem. It's different. It's a much more volatile production ecosystem. So maybe you have a good year and you have a good crop. It's a very, very good year. But the years you have a bad crop is a really bad year. So one of the things and the challenges we have with Pago Rural, for example, is building a model where you can deal with that. It's building a model where, for example, you can roll over 50% of your portfolio from one year to another. Because maybe, Nathan, you're a very good farmer. You have a very, very good character. You're a very well producer. But one year, you have a drought. You won't sell your farm. You will ask for more time to pay. And that's one of the gaps we have to fill. We have to give you a tool that lets you have the needed flexibility to cope with that. That's one of the main challenges in Paraguay, for example. Administrate the volatile markets and the volatile production.
Yeah, to smooth out those peaks and valleys of nature-induced problems in farming.
One of the things that I always think about is Bunge, Cargill, ADM, Dreyfus. They work worldwide. They manage to originate beans in Paraguay as well as in Iowa or Illinois, okay? What we really have to be very humble about is it's not easy going to and putting your flag in a presentation to go into another country, but you shouldn't be afraid of. You should be really humble, ask the silly questions, have good advisors. And I think it's very important to have a good local partner that really understands the ways, how to manage timing, how to manage people, how to address, I don't know, it's difficult. For example, it's very difficult how Americans address some things than we Latin Americans do, okay? It's not good or bad. It's about different ways we do it. And I think regarding agribusiness, farmers are really special worldwide, and you have to understand them from their own point of view. And from that point of view, build the financial tools to help them, not otherwise. Many times banks go to a country with a business model, with something like you say, like enlatado, like something like a closed model. And I think that would be a big mistake for us with Pago Rural. We have to be very humble. The farmer's experience has to be as easy in Paraguay as it is in Argentina. But when you go and speak about a structured finance model, we have to work a lot with our investors, with our advisors to make it as strong as needed and as flexible as needed for the farmer.
You talk a lot about, you said humble a lot of times through this conversation so far. And what advice would you give to other entrepreneurs that are just starting when thinking about how do you actually figure out what a client needs and build something for them rather than just sort of dumping your idea of what it should be on them?
I think we have two ears and one mouth. We should always listen more than we speak. Many things I've done in the past 8 years, I've learned them from my clients. Again, being humble is, of course, being sure about your model. You're going to run around with many people that tell you you're crazy, with many people tell you should go back to your trading company. But I think that in the sense you're speaking, they should listen to the market. They should be really aware of what clients say. And I think every successful company, from Facebook to Amazon to every company, when you go deep, they're always listening to their clients. They're always paying attention to what the customers say. And I think that's really important. I think many times we get in love with a model, we get in love with an idea, and we forget about who's the important one in the chain, and it's the client. It's the one that pays for the service. It's the one that drives the value chain, the consumer.
Yeah, I think is right. And so what do you think was the difference for you to be able to first raise money from people in Silicon Valley, and then now with your latest round from people in Europe being from Latin America? What would set you apart? And then what advice would you give to other Latin American founders, or even just founders not in Silicon Valley, to how they should think about raising money?
I think one of the first things is thinking out of the box. I think that reading Y Combinator, watching a lot of YouTube videos, it's good. You run along a lot of ideas, but in Latin America, you have to be really creative and not closing any deal flow. For example, back in 2016, we were addressing venture capital in Silicon Valley, and we came along with the impression that we wouldn't be able to raise money only executed in Argentina. So we changed our mindset. We went ahead looking for different investors with different needs. And I think you always should bear in mind that there's no money better than other. Maybe people talk about smart money or not smart money. I think in Latin America, for the most, you have to be really, really creative when speaking about deal flow, when trying to look where to raise money. And I think it's much more difficult to find a specific investor interested in you, okay? So it's more like a marriage than in the US, that you have a lot of options. You go to, Sand Hill Road and go and pitch to 100 to 120 venture capitalists. This is another game, no? I think Latin America is a complete different ballgame. I don't know if you agree, but I think we should take the very good examples in the US. People should not be afraid of raising money in Silicon Valley if they are executing in Latin America. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying it's difficult. I'm saying it's not easy for investors in Silicon Valley investing in Argentina, where, for example, they do not have a direct flight, for example. You cannot take a flight from San Francisco directly to Buenos Aires, for example. So mainly, it's important, if you want to raise in the US, that you execute in the US, or you're appealing for the US. And if not, trying to think out of the box. Where can you raise money in Latin America? And sometimes you have it much more closer than you can imagine.
What advice, speaking of US investors or just even the US market, what would you tell US investors about why they should at least take a look at companies with Latin American founders or that are operating in Latin America?
we spoke about this a little while ago with the thing this of lo atamos con alambre in Argentina. No, you have very good entrepreneurs here. You have people trotting with mud up to the knees, and I think if those entrepreneurs have the opportunity of executing with money, with good advisors, with people that support them in the long run, they could get a really good business. For example, a couple of months ago, I had a meeting with one of the main bankers in the World Bank, and he was really good, really well impressed by what we are doing with Pago Rural. And he asked me 5 or 6 times in a 30-minute meeting, how could they help us, no, with the World Bank? And I told them, we really need in agribusiness long-term. And in Latin America, something you do not have is long-term. Latin America is really volatile. Governments change. You have impeachment in Brazil. You have the cepo cambiario here in Argentina. It's really difficult coping in the long term. And that's very different in the US and Europe. I think that one of the things we could get as Latin American entrepreneurs is all the skills we get, what we reinforce, administrating a very volatile atmosphere, but executing with a long-term view, with a long-term partner. And I think that could be a really good combination.
I think that's basically what most business people want, to know what the rules of the game are going to be, to know that it's going to be stable, even if the rules aren't great, but just know what the rules are that aren't going to be changing. I think that's one of Chile's biggest wins over the last, 20 or 25 years. The laws really haven't changed. It's been the same. Whereas, Argentina or Brazil, there've been changes back and forth, seemingly every 5 years.
And many people trade on those things and make a lot of money. But when you speak about long-term ventures, you need stability. You need people that support you in the long run. You need investors that support the founder in the long run. And that's a huge challenge because, for example, I understand investors, they have their LPs, and they are pressured to execute. But I think that there's a very, very good opportunity in a lot of Latin American startups. I'll tell you something, at a premium, at a discount from the same startup in the US. You can invest in Latin America at much lower valuations than you do in the US and maybe having a better exit. But I think they have to start looking. We entrepreneurs have to lose, not being afraid of going abroad to raise money, but having into an account that it's going to be a difficult one. It's not easy. It's a marathon, not a sprint. Many times in the US, you go out of Stanford or Harvard with an idea and you raise a couple of $1 million. Raising a couple of $1 million in Latin America, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint.
Yeah, what you just described about being able to invest at lower valuations and maybe end up with similar or even better returns than the US as an investor side to lower risk, you basically just described the Magma business model. So that's really what we're trying to do, is find the best entrepreneurs in Latin America and help them grow, whether that's in Latin America or getting to the US.
Yeah, of course.
And so speaking of the US, what would be something surprising that about either doing business in Latin America or just Latin America's business climate in general that somebody in the US would say, wow, I had no idea that it was like that?
I think that taxes, for example, and coping with all this rule changing mainly on a monthly or weekly basis, it's really stressful. It really makes you be alert. And I think that people in the US wouldn't dare imagine being occupied or preoccupied with taxes or with daily, weekly or monthly changes in laws, I think when you start a business there, you have a set of rules, a set of taxes. You go to your advisor, to your big four firm, and then you start rolling and start to focus on your business. Here in Latin America, I think we're much more focused on tactics than on strategies. And sometimes that's good, and sometimes it's not, because you might be going against your strategy because of being very preoccupied with the tactics of your daily and weekly or monthly tactics. And that's a very big challenge here, It's not easy to think on the long run. And I think that when you build a startup, you have to think in 5 to 7 years. I'm going to speak about Argentina, but imagine being able to imagine what's going to happen in 5 years in Argentina. It's like being a wizard. It's really difficult. It's really difficult. So people here, they trade on a daily basis. You might know Argentina, for example, has been a food producer for the last 150 years, but it has go back and forth many times. For example, you might compare not to the US, to Australia, to New Zealand, much more stable countries where you can have rules much more clear. Okay, you mentioned Chile. Chile is a very, very nice example for the last 20 to 25 years. So I think one of the main challenges for an outsider is how do we cope nearly on a daily basis with all this noise?
Yeah, no, that is one of those things where Argentina, especially when I explain to friends, now it's not the same, but even 3 years ago or 4 years ago when you could take dollars and trade them for pesos on the street at a different rate, they just didn't understand that was even a thing.
Yes, of course. Well, that's a country, and that's a sad thing about it. No, it's opportunity in a way, but I think in the long run, it's one of the explanations of why we don't have more Mercado Libres or more Globans here in Argentina. The talent is there, but I think we need the rules.
Yeah, I think that's right. And what about going the other way? So since you've now raised some money in the US and then also in Europe and talked with people in the States and in Europe, what is something that Latin Americans or Latin American founders don't understand about the US or European market?
I think culture, all the focus we have to have in all these daily noises, an American or a European entrepreneur has it to the business. They are focused in the business. They are focused on creating value on a daily basis. You're not focused on how to administrate volatile markets. You're not focusing how to administrate a new tax they've imposed to you a week ago. So I think, for example, we have now an intern that's come back from LA in the US, and comparing him to the two young guys working in the team from Argentina, he's really much more focused. Americans and Europeans are much more business focused than we are on a daily basis, not because we do not like business, but because we're used to tackle that many noises and problems that maybe you take out the focus from the really important strategic things on the long run. And I think one of the things it's surprising is working with Americans. They do not care about taxes changing from one day to another. They do not care if you can or not make a wire transfer from one day to another. You care about important things. All those things are given. All those things are the rule book you start with beforehand. You might like them or not, but you know them beforehand. I think that's one of the most surprising things. And I think another thing is that I've learned is how you deal with, you have a better deal in the US and Europe with money, with money, with public institutions, mingling out with private institutions, venture capitals, endowment funds. There's a whole ecosystem that we don't have in Latin America.
You talked about the mud up to your knees earlier. I think it's just so much easier thinking about doing business when you're in the States, where you just don't have to deal with that, where you just really do focus on your day-to-day business activities rather than all of the other noises, as you put it. I think that's right.
It might surprise you, but it's good. And I think also a nice challenge is competition. For example, you go to New York, you go to Palo Alto, you have a lot of entrepreneurs. You have a lot of people competing for the same stake. I think that's nice. Competition, from my point of view, takes the best of everyone. No, you like thrive to be the best one. Here, you're preoccupied with not doing bad. There, you focus with creating value, with being the best one, with being the best at what you do, the best firm, like thriving with your model. I think that would be the most surprising thing for us Latin Americans working in the US and Europe.
And so, since you've been doing this now 8 years and you've grown from nothing all the way to putting $120 million in structured vehicles for the year and continuing to grow with, 15,000 clients. What advice would you give to yourself, knowing what you know now, to you as you're just leaving your trading job?
One of the things is I underestimated money. I was really conservative and I underestimated cash flow. I nearly went bankrupt in 2015 because I was really invested in my business, and it was a really particular bad year in Argentina with a lot of political instability and a lot of noise there. I nearly went bankrupt after 6 successful years. So one of the advice I would give Patricio back in the years is do not underestimate money, raise money beforehand. You need it. Do a lot more of network. I think another thing that is surprising about Europe and the US is how they network since they are really, really young. In Argentina and in Latin America, it's like if you do network for business, it's like a bad word, It's like, are we friends or are we doing business? No? And I think that barrier has been thrown down in the US and Europe. It's normal if you go and tackle someone at a coffee or at a Starbucks and ask him for advice or maybe pitch him to make an investment. Here in Argentina, it's like, I think I would advise myself to raise money earlier, to be more fond of network. I think I've done quite well. I'm happy, But I think one of the main lessons learned from 2015, that was a really bad year, is underestimating raising money.
Yeah, it is one of those things that, especially it sounds like in your business where you are dealing with cyclical nature of politics, but then also just the weather and whether it's a good growing season or not, that, having that reserve there is really important.
Really, really important. In agribusiness, you see farmers, family farmers, and then you see big multinationals. One of the things is they address instability in different ways. Farmers are really conservative and big firms have a lot of money. In the middle, you nearly don't see anyone. There are not much middle companies in agribusiness. You got the big Monsantos, the big Bangis, the big Syngentas, or farmers. You do not have a lot of SMEs in the ecosystem. And I think one of the things is because you have to deal with a lot of instability, with a lot of volatility.
That just adds another dimension to the business that makes it really hard. Rather than just focusing on executing, you have to deal with those outside forces as well.
That's one of the main challenges when you speak about agritech or agribusiness. For example, Nathan, one of the very difficult things is you interact with your client once or twice a year. You need money once or twice a year, so I can go and visit you on a monthly basis, but you wouldn't be much more interested in Pago Rural till when you need money. Okay, that's a very different scenario from, for example, a marketplace. I can interact with my customers on hourly, daily, weekly basis. I'm much more in contact and have much more tools to work with than if I interact with my client once or twice a year. And that's one of the most difficult challenges we had in the last years.
Yeah, that's got to be really, really tough where you can't really stay top of mind because they only will reach out when they actually need you.
Of course. That's why in our model, we really work close with our vendors, and we decided not to contract directly with the farmers, but to do value chain finance. We do like a B2B2C model. We do a business, for example, with Dow Chemical, and alongside Dow Chemical, we offer Pago Rural to all of their customers.
No, and that's good too, because you don't have to go out and go to every single one of the, I think you said 30,000 farmers in Argentina one by one. It's always good to go with a bigger client.
Yeah.
Well, and so what do you see as your next steps with DTA and Pago Rural? Are you going to be doing the next year or a few years?
We're really focused in executing the next 90 to 180 days. It's a huge challenge. We've worked a long way to do it. It's an inflection point that we have, an opportunity we have to execute and go to a next level. when we think about the next 5 years or 2 years, we see a huge opportunity, but we never forget the next 90 to 180 days. So I think what we really focus in is executing, giving the best service to our customers in Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay, and really making all the homework to understand how, when, and how we go to the Brazilian market and to the American market. The next steps in the next year would be executing in Brazil and the US, but we really, really focus in the next 90 to 180 days.
No, that makes sense. I'm excited to see how you keep growing as you start expanding outside of Argentina, and interested to see what you decide to choose between Brazil or the US for your next big move. I think it's going to be interesting to see.
Yeah, it's a difficult decision. As I told you, we're trying to make all the homework. We're working alongside, of course, listening to our customers, listening to what Monsanto has to say, to what Dow has to say, to what our customer has to say regarding where they have the needs also, no? If they need us to execute in Brazil, if they need us to help them in the US, how can we help them? How can we help farmers? And also, if we can manage to get the funding at the right rate, at the right pricing to address the farmers in those markets, okay? So it's not only listening where the needs are, but also having to an account if we can meet those needs and trying to execute in those markets. One of the strategic things about the US, as I told you, number one, counter season. Number two, showing potential investors in the American market. We can not only execute in Latin America, but also in the first world.
Yeah, I think as an investor that helps companies go from LATAM to the States, our view has always been, if you can actually do it in Latin America, it's not going to be a problem in the US, because it's going to be so much easier when you remove that layer of mud.
Of course, I hope so.
Yeah, I think it will be. Well, thanks again for taking the time to have this conversation with me. I really enjoyed it. You have a really cool story and a business that's definitely making impact across Latin America. I'm excited to see how you keep growing over the next couple of years here. Next time I'm in Buenos Aires, definitely shoot you a mail so you can get a beer. Keep talking.
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to share with you and your audience. I apologize for my English. It's not always that easy to speak about your business in your mother language than in English. I speak a lot of English, but it's not the same thing where you want to have a long chat, but I really apologize. I want to make it better the next time. But thank you very, very much. And please feel free to contact us whenever you want. And we'll wait for you here in Buenos Aires with an asadito and a beer.
For sure. And where can people find you online?
It's dtalatam.com or pagorural.com.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for doing it. And your English is just fine. Don't worry about it.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks. Thanks again for listening to this episode with Patricio Williams. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, I recommend checking out episode 9 with another very successful Argentine entrepreneur, Diego Saez Gil from Blue Smart. You can find us on iTunes and Stitcher by searching Crossing Borders, or just go to my website, nathanlusting.com. Thanks again.